Breaking news this hour right now from the Washington Post, and it looks like an impeachment-related blockbuster, an apparent effort by President Trump to directly involve and, to quote the Post, use Vice President Mike Pence in this now explodes plot to pressure Ukraine to target Joe Biden. Now, the reporting includes Pence aides saying they didn't know what Trump was up to, but that there were instructions to Pence to inform Ukraine that this key military aid at the center of the impeachment probe was being withheld and calling for tougher anti-corruption measures. Now, to what Pence aides have been telling, they say, well, he didn't know Trump was pursuing dirt on Joe Biden. But, as I was just discussing on this breaking story with our experts, a Pence aide was also on the infamous Ukraine call where all of that was made clear. Donald Trump's language, meanwhile, in the past day has turned quite menacing, calling the impeachment inquiry a coup, a reference to military takeovers, using profanity that I'm not going to say, and accusing Adam Schiff of maybe treason.
I saw Schiff trying to go 15, call him Shifty Schiff. We don't call him Shifty Schiff for nothing. He's a shifty, dishonest guy. There's an expression, he couldn't carry his blank strap. I won't say it because they'll say it was so terrible to say. But that guy couldn't carry his blank strap.
I'm joined now by a former speechwriter in the George W. Bush White House, David Frum, who dealt with foreign policy issues and has a keen eye on the Trump White House. His book, Trumpocracy, The Corruption of the American Republic. David, thanks for joining me. This is a kind of a news cycle where I want to hear what you're thinking. I assume you've had a chance to take a look at this Washington Post report, your read on what it means.
Well, two things. First, it's so weird that Vice President Pence did not know that Donald Trump was seeking dirt on the Bidens with Rudy Giuliani's aid, because people who read the New York Times have known that story since March. What we've learned in the last little while is the final and most terrible smoking gun clue. But the basic outline of the story has been known for months. So it's kind of amazing that Mike Pence didn't know it. And indeed, Donald Trump is not so reckless as to let his vice president remain clean. It's going to be very important to President Trump in this harrowing circumstance facing him to make sure that the vice president is as dirty as possible, to make sure that their interests are aligned, as they say in the document.
So let's let you build on that point, because viewers know I had Mark Lauder from the Trump campaign on last week. We have Trump officials back on. They will say you're being unfair and getting ahead of the facts. I ask you, what facts and evidence do you have for the view that Donald Trump may have had knowledge that what he was doing was wrong, and to the extent that anyone might say it disqualifies him, he wanted to spread it around to disqualify others?
Well, one of the things that happens in the Trump administration that where none of us are quite used to is the complete absence of subterfuge. There's nothing furtive about this. Normally when people take bribes in government, they meet in underground parking lots, they look around, they move the envelope of money back and forth, they make sure the police aren't looking. When Donald Trump wants a bribe, he opens a hotel on Pennsylvania Avenue, rolls a red carpet down to the street, puts his name in big brass on the front door, and welcomes the world. We who are used to people doing wrong things with some twinge of guilt are unready to deal with someone who does it so flagrantly. So when Donald Trump has been pressing Ukraine to give him assistance to pursue this crazy theory he has that Seth Rich was the real hacker and not the Russian state, he's been doing that in public, and he's been doing that for 2 years. So what we didn't know was he directly asked the president of Ukraine to do this. We know that because of a transcript or a summary from his own White House. We have the confession. Now, people are now saying, people around Trump are now saying, well, gee, we don't know that the protocol for obtaining the confession met every single regulatory rule that we would like to impose, but the confession is there. We can all see it.
You lay that out pretty clearly. I appreciate that. And David, I wonder what you think of whether we are seeing the beginning of a new, we're familiar, especially with papers like the Post and the Times, the way they've reported out things, the Friday night, the late stories. I wonder whether we're getting into a new chapter, which is reporting that relates to people in high places in Washington discussing the prospect of a Senate trial of the president. Because this, to me, reads like an impeachment-style story, not just a foreign policy story or a Mueller probe story. It reads like that. And to your point, I pressed you a little bit to back yourself up. Now I actually have some evidence that we just pulled in our archive that does agree with part of your theory, which is the president, before this story broke in this hour, before people were talking about, well, does Pence have the same Ukraine problem the president has? The president blatantly, publicly urging reporters, go ask Pence about what he did. Take a look.
Yeah.
I think you should ask for VP Pence's conversation, because he had a couple of conversations also. I could save you a lot of time. They were all perfect.
How does that look, given this Post story tonight?
Well, that looks like Donald Trump knows he's in trouble. A historical contrast. In the last days of Watergate, when President Nixon was in trouble, Vice President Ford, who came in, remember, was not Nixon's running mate in 68 or 72. He stepped in when Spiro Agnew was forced to resign because of accusations of proven criminality and bribe taking. Gerald Ford got on a plane and spent his time as vice president fundraising for Republicans as far away from Washington as possible. He had a clean record in Congress, and he kept his record clean as vice president. But something else happened that was important, which is Republicans and Democrats alike knew that Ford's integrity was an important resource for the nation, and that it was a good thing for everybody that Ford be well away from Washington, so that when Nixon did go, there was someone untainted who could step into Nixon's place. And that was a real mercy in the last time we had a completed impeachment crisis. This time, the problem we're going to have is we don't have a clean, the vice president would step into the president's shoes should he be removed, but we don't have someone who's untainted, who can command the confidence of the nation.
And you argue that's deliberate? You argue that's deliberately Trump's plan?
Well, I think that's just a confluence of events. I mean, Vice President Pence he ran with Trump, which Ford did not do with Nixon. Yeah. And Pence also saw his path to influence within the administration as sticking as close to as possible to the president.
Final thing before I fit in a break, David, I got to ask you the other news intrigue here. When you read this story, does it feel like people around Pence are trying to burnish him better, a little different than Ford, but trying to do that? Are we there yet, or is this just the Post doggedly getting information?
They have to be thinking about the future, not just impeachment, but what if, for some reason, Donald Trump's health were to deteriorate between now and 2020, and Donald Trump would discover that he couldn't run for some reason? Pence has to be thinking, do we want to make a small change because he's threatened with the possibility that nervous Republicans may say, let's sweep the whole ticket away and run someone entirely new?
And I can only imagine how this is playing inside the White House, David, as the president reads the person that he thinks he gave his national political career to, Mike Pence, has people who are identified as Pence aides telling the Washington Post, hey, we're not involved in whatever this Ukraine thing is. I mean, this is quite a story. David, thank you so much, sir.
Thank you.
Hey, I'm Ari Melber from MSNBC. You can see more of our videos right here, or better yet, subscribe to our YouTube channel below. You could have been anywhere in the world, but you're here with us, and we appreciate that.